Ola Stasiuk, a graduate student of Ukrainian Catholic University and Central European University in Vienna, and today I will speak about trapped between the monastic and secular cases of forced monasticism in Central Europe in registers of Apostolic Penitentiary from 1431 to 1492. On the 18th of May in 1463, a scribe of the Apostolic Penitentiary wrote down an interesting case. The petitioner was called Conradus Hons. He was a cleric who claimed that he was forced to enter the Benedictine monastery by his parents. They even paid the abbot 10 florins to keep Conradus inside the monastic walls. When the monks asked the boy if he wanted to stay, he refused. But the parents forced him to take the vow and become a monk. Conradus tried to escape twice, and only the second time was successful. But unfortunately, in the eyes of some people, he was a monk already, so he could not live in the world and fell under the punishment of excommunication. Conradus refused his guilt and came to the Pope. The man was trapped between the secular and monastic worlds, and only the Apostolic Penitentiary could decide on which side he was. The penitentiary was a specific papal office, which later became a specific tribunal of the Catholic Church. Its main function was to grant different declarations and absolutions from the most severe sins, such as killing a priest, permissions to avoid certain canon law restrictions, such as eating milk in Lent, or special declarations which freed people from the forced monastic or marital vow. But why the institution did so, and why Conradus could not live peacefully outside the monastic walls, despite the fact that his vow was forced? To answer these questions, it is better to start from the beginning and explain how a person could become a monk or nun in canon law, and what differentiated the monastic and secular people there. The monastic regulations of Western Europe started from the rules of Saint Benedict. It did not mention forced monasticism, but prescribed checking the newcomers whether they indeed wanted the monastic life or not. It was Rule 58. In times of Saint Benedict, the novitiate already existed, which was also a border state between the monastic and secular, because a person wore specific clothes and lived inside monastic space, but still he or she could live. But the same rule of Saint Benedict allowed parents to give their children to God, as Anna did with Samuel in Old Testament, and did not prescribe asking children whether they wanted to enter the monastery. Thus, the situation was problematic. The newcomer should have the firm intention to serve the God in the monastery, but at the same time, the will of pious parents should be completed and the children had to obey their parents. Medieval theologians and canonists had to deal with these problems during the whole Middle Ages. Trying to balance these positions, the famous canonist Gratian of Bologna, in his Decretum, compared the opinions of very famous authorities. He wrote that indeed some of them supported the forced monasticism of children, for example, St. Augustine or Gregory the Great. But more recent or more practical decisions, for instance, of Popes Eugene and Marcellus, forbade keeping children in the monastery with coercion. And in general, Gratian wrote a lot about non-coerced monasticism, especially in the third question of case 20. Liber Extra, the next part of classical canon law after Decretum Gratiani, also supported the non-forced monasticism. For instance, it included the resolution of the Mainz Council, which said that no one should be tonsured unless of free will and legitimate age. The legitimate age was 14, and it was already mentioned in Gratian. Any vows before this age were not valid, so petitioners in the penitentiary used it and said that they were forced to the monastery, for example, in 12 or 13, because it was an additional proof that the entrance was illegitimate. Conradus did the same because he said that he was forced to enter the monastery being 13 years old. Free will in general became very important in medieval theology and canon law, and many scholars, including St. Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologica, wrote a lot against forced monasticism. So, to cross the world between the monastic and secular life, the person had to have free will, a proper age, and make a vow. But Liber Extra also regulated other aspects which differentiated monks and seculars. As Pope Alexander III wrote in the letter to the Bishop of Ely, after taking the vow, the clothes should be changed to the monastic ones, and the novices' clothes should also be different. Pope Gregory IX knew that some orders prescribed to have for monks and novices the same clothes, so he decided that monks' clothes in this case had to be blessed. The monk also should not leave the space of the monastery without permission, and his stabilitas loci, was considered the virtue, and runaway religious were excommunicated on account of apostasy. In fact, runaway religious were a common problem in the Middle Ages, and various researchers, such as of Elizabeth Makowski or Donald Logan, proved it. However, one entry in the Liber Extra seemed to restrict free will. Popes approved that even if forced to monasticism, a child cannot leave the monastery after a year and could not be taken by parents. Only reaching the legitimate age, he might agree or disagree with staying in the monastery in front of monastic authorities. But usually the reality was even more complicated, and the person had to obtain a specific declaration that he or she is secular. While coercion was mostly condemned and could be used to annul the vows, people had to obtain the appropriate permissions from the ecclesiastical authorities to return to the life of their own choice. Issuing such declarations became even more popular in late Middle Ages, and for instance, we can see them in the first registers of the Apostolic Penitentiary. The registers we know started from 1409. The historians could not work with this source till 1983 because they fall under the secrecy of confession, but then the Pope opened the archives and many scholars started to publish the cases and study them. For instance, Kirsi Salonen, Pater Clark, Paolo Ostinelli, Gerhard Jaritz, and others. In this research, the cases of German-speaking countries were used, published from 1996 onwards by Ludwig Schmuge. The source showed that despite the regulation of canon law about a free will entrance to the monastery, the forced monasticism was a popular thing in the 15th century. And in the period between 1431 and the end of the century, the registers included 107 cases of forced monasticism, and the female petitioners prevailed, about 60%. All the victims suffered from the same problem. They were trapped between the monastic and secular worlds because they considered themselves secular and wanted to marry or just live and serve the god outside the monastery. But monastic authorities, relatives, and communities saw them as monastics. The cases from the penitentiary revealed a couple of reasons why people were considered monastics. First of all, it was because of education. The noble woman Margaret de Keckenbecke, for example, from the Cologne diocese, faced this problem when he was left by her parents in the Monasterium Sancti Maurici for education for noble women. After that, she got married to certain Johannes, but some people said she could not do that because she was a nun. So in 1463, the same year as Conradus, she came to the Apostolic Penitentiary and obtained the declaration that she was secular. In fact, the situation of Margaret was even more complicated because she wore monastic clothes while studying. It was a common tradition of monastic schools. The visual distinction between monks and secular people was mainly connected to the different garments. Even if many orders did not properly regulate habitus in the 15th century, a monk could not wear the same clothes as laymen because it would be a violation of canon law. Thus, people who wore monastic clothes because of education or because they were novices for a while were seen as monastics and often had to apply to the penitentiary to clean their names. In the papal office, they had to explain why they wore habitus or had to emphasize that the clothes were for novices so they did not take the final vow and could return to the world. For instance, Christianus Sunera from the Constant Diocese wore only novice clothes until he finally escaped. That was a visual sign for him that he never became fully monastic. However, people who forced others to the monastery understood that in canon law, that's not monastic space or the monastic clothes that make a person monastic. The vow was the most important part. Usually, the victims suffered from the coercion twice because first they were forced to enter the monastery in their childhood, and then they were forced to vow in the legitimate age. For instance, Ludwig Schmuge analyzed the case of Magdalena Peirerin from the Constant Diocese. She was forced to monastery by her father, who wanted to leave all inheritance to her brother. The father even beat up her and threatened her to kill her, which was not very rare in cases of forced monasticism. So Magdalena took the vow, but the vow was forced, so despite being a nun in the eyes of relatives and other people, she considered herself secular and wanted to marry. Indeed, a person forced to vow remained secular in canonical jurisprudence, but the coercion had to be expressed and proved properly. Let's take a closer look to the story of the Magdalena. Although she was only 7 years old, she was stubborn enough, and the girl did not want to obey her father and said that all the situation was contra eius voluntatem, against her will. When the father returned to the monastery to force her to vow, she cried and protested in front of him and other nuns. The witnesses were important. So it was evidence for everybody that this entrance was forced. The penitentiary decided to check her narrative, and if the coercion was enough to annul the vow, she could live in the world and marry. Indeed, not all forms of coercion was valid to destroy the vow, and many canonists and jurists work on the proper definition of coercion. In Liber Extra, the formula per vim qui cadere poterat in constantem virum existed for that. It was borrowed from Roman law and meant that victims had to feel the fear enough to move a constant man. Many victims used it in their narratives to prove that their coercion was enough. Similarly, some decisions included this formula, implying that the vow should be annulled if the witnesses confirmed that the threat was this strong. This formula was only one of many formulas used in the victims' narratives to convince canonists of the penitentiary and obtain a favorable decision. But ordinary people did not know canon law, obviously. They hired specially trained jurists, proctors, who wrote supplications for them according to Stilus Curiae. Thus, the important part of solving the situation when you are trapped between the monastic and secular worlds was to reshape the narrative with the help of the proctor, emphasizing the essential points in the story and using the proper terms. For instance, the proctor could emphasize that the victim wore only novice's clothes, so it was a proof that he never became a monk. Proctor could also exaggerate the victim's fear and tell about the bad conditions of life or piety or good intentions of the victim. Because of that, the petition became a narrative similar to those that Natalie Zeman Davis analyzed in her Pardon Tales. It was a story with its exposition and climax and the resolution asked from the Apostolic Penitentiary. In fact, we don't know exactly how the stories ended. because the penitentiary prescribed to ask the local witnesses whether the petition was valid, and it is difficult to say whether it was always successful. We see that in cases of coercion, the relatives, monks, and even monastic authorities could take part in forcing a child to the monastery and even could be paid for that. Moreover, the definition of coercion, especially of that which can move a constant man, was difficult to apply to practice, especially to women. But it does not mean that all cases ended unsuccessfully. Otherwise, people would not continue to come to the penitentiary every year. We saw that the borders between secular and monastic were blurry, and many people were trapped between the two worlds because of forced monasticism. The canonists of the penitentiary had to answer the question whether the petitioner was monk or secular, but it was not easy because of unclear definitions of coercion and which type of coercion was enough, lack of witnesses, and complicated stories. At the same time, people tried to convince their coercers and canonists of apostolic penitentiary in an unwillingness to be monks or nuns. They could publicly protest, wear novices' clothes, escape from the monasteries, come to the penitentiary, and with the help of proctors, properly shape their stories to obtain a favorable decision. Even if some of them just looked for excuses from the apostasy and lied, many others indeed wanted to stay secular, when other people and monastic authorities wanted them to stay monastic. Looking at these cases, we can say that these people were courageous enough to apply to Rome, but the historians would never know how many other victims did not do so, living their whole lives in between the monastic and secular worlds.